The plebeian tribunate, according to the annalistic tradition, one of the most important events in the struggle of the orders was the creation of the plebeian tribunate. After being worn down by military service, bad economic conditions, and the rigors of early Rome's debt law, the plebeians in 494 BC seceded in a body from the city to the Sacred Mount, located 3 miles from Rome. There they pitched camp and elected their own officials for their future protection. Because the state was threatened with an enemy attack, the Senate was forced to allow the plebeians to have their own officials, the tribunes of the plebs. Initially there were only 2 tribunes of the plebs, but their number increased to 5 in 471 BC and to 10 in 457 BC. They had no insignia of office, like the consuls, but they were regarded as sacrosanct. Whoever physically harmed them could be killed with impunity. They had the right to intercede on a citizen's behalf against the action of a consul, but their powers were valid only within 1 mile from the Pomerium. They convoked the tribal assembly and submitted bills to it for legislation. Tribunes prosecuted other magistrates before the assembled people for misconduct in office. They could also veto the action of another tribune, veto meaning I forbid. 2 plebeian aediles served as their assistants in managing the affairs of the city. Although they were thought of as the champions of the people, persons elected to this office came from aristocratic families and generally favored the status quo. Nevertheless, the office could be and sometimes was used by young aspiring aristocrats to make a name for themselves by taking up populist causes in opposition to the nobility. Modern scholars disagree about the authenticity of the annalistic account concerning the plebs' first secession and the creation of the plebeian tribunate. The tradition presented this as the first of 3 secessions, the other 2 allegedly occurring in 449 and 287 BC. The second secession is clearly fictitious. Many scholars regard the first one as a later annalistic invention as well, accepting only the last one as historical. Although the first secession is explained in terms resembling the conditions of the later Gracchian agrarian crisis, see below the reform movement of the Gracchi, 133 to 121 BC. Given the harshness of early Roman debt laws and food shortages recorded by the sources for 492 and 488 BC, information likely to be preserved in contemporary religious records. Social and economic unrest could have contributed to the creation of the office. However, the urban civilian character of the plebeian tribunate complements the extra-urban military nature of the consulship so nicely that the 2 offices may have originally been designed to function cooperatively to satisfy the needs of the state, rather than to be antagonistic to one another. The Law of the 12 Tables. The next major episode after the creation of the plebeian tribunate in the annalistic version of the struggle of the orders involved the first systematic codification of Roman law. The plebeians were supposed to have desired a written law code in which consular imperium would be circumscribed to guard against abuses. After years of tribunician agitation, the Senate finally agreed. A special board of 10 men, decemviri, was appointed for 451 BC to draw up a law code. Since their task was not done after 1 year, a second board of 10 was appointed to finish the job, but they became tyrannical and stayed in office beyond their time. They were finally forced out of power when one commissioner's cruel lust for an innocent maiden named Virginia so outraged the people that they seceded for a second time. The law code was inscribed upon 12 bronze tablets and publicly displayed in the Forum. Its provisions concerned legal procedure, debt foreclosure, paternal authority over children, property rights, inheritance, funerary regulations, and various major and minor offenses. Although many of its provisions became outmoded and were modified or replaced in later times, the Law of the 12 Tables formed the basis of all subsequent Roman private law. Because the law code seems not to have had any specific provisions concerning consular imperium, the annalistic explanation for the codification appears suspect. The story of the second tyrannical board of 10 is an annalistic invention patterned after the 30 tyrants of Athenian history. The tale of Virginia is likewise modeled after the story of Lucretia and the overthrow of Rome's last king. Thus the second secession, which is an integral part of the story, cannot be regarded as historical. On the basis of existing evidence, One cannot say whether the law code resulted from any social or economic causes. Rome was a growing city and may simply have been in need of a systematic body of law, military tribunes with consular power. The creation of the office of military tribunes with consular power in 445 BC was believed to have involved the struggle of the orders. The annalistic tradition portrayed the innovation as resulting from a political compromise between plebeian tribunes, demanding access to the consulship, and the Senate, trying to maintain the patrician monopoly of the office. Henceforth, each year the people were to decide whether to elect 2 patrician consuls or military tribunes with consular power who could be patricians or plebeians. The list of magistrates for 444 to 367 BC shows that the chief magistracy alternated between consuls and military tribunes. Consuls were more frequently elected down to 426 but rarely thereafter. At first there were 3 military tribunes, but the number increased to 4 in 426 and to 6 in 406. The consular tribunate was abolished in 367 BC and replaced by the consulship. Livy indicates that according to some sources the consular tribunate was created because Rome was faced with 3 wars simultaneously. Because there is evidence that there was no prohibition against plebeians becoming consuls, scholars have suggested that the reason for the innovation was the growing military and administrative needs of the Roman state. This view is corroborated by other data. Beginning in 447 BC, 2 quaestors were elected as financial officials of the consuls, and the number increased to 4 in 421 BC. Beginning in 443 BC, 2 censors were elected about every 5 years and held office for 18 months. They drew up official lists of Roman citizens, assessed the value of their property, and assigned them to their proper tribe and century within the tribal and centuriate assemblies. The increase in the number of military tribunes coincided with Rome's first 2 major wars, against Fedini and Veii. In 366 BC, 6 undifferentiated military tribunes were replaced with 5 magistrates that had specific functions, 2 consuls for conducting wars, an urban praetor who handled lawsuits in Rome, and 2 curule aediles who managed various affairs in the city. In 362 BC, the Romans began to elect annually 6 military tribunes as subordinate officers of the consuls. Social and economic changes. The law reinstating the consulship was one of 3 tribunician bills, the so-called Licinio-Sextian rogations of 367 BC. Another forbade citizens to rent more than 500 iudura, 330 acres, of public land, and the third provided for the alleviation of indebtedness. The historicity of the second bill has often been questioned, but the great increase in the size of Roman territory resulting from Rome's conquest of Veii renders this law plausible. The law concerning indebtedness is probably historical as well, since other data suggest that debt was a problem in mid-4th century Rome. In 352 BC, a 5-man commission was appointed to extend public credit in order to reduce private indebtedness. A Janutian law of 342 BC, named after Janutius, tribune of that year, temporarily suspended the charging of interest on loans. In 326 or 313 BC, a Poet-Elian law ameliorated the harsh conditions of the 12 tables regarding debt servitude by outlawing the use of chains to confine debt bondsmen. Rome's economic advancement is reflected in its replacement of a cumbersome bronze currency with silver coinage adopted from the Greek states of southern Italy, the so-called Romano-Campanian didrachms. The date of this innovation is disputed. Modern estimates range from the First Samnite War to the Pyrrhic War. Rome was no longer a small town of central Italy but rather was quickly becoming the master of the Italian peninsula and was taking its place in the larger Mediterranean world. The process of expansion is well illustrated by innovations in Roman private law about 300 BC. Since legal business could be conducted only on certain days, dies fasti, knowledge of the calendar was important for litigation. In early times, the Rex Sacrorum at the beginning of each month orally proclaimed in Rome before the assembled people the official calendar for that month. Though suited for a small agricultural community, this parochial procedure became increasingly unsuitable as Roman territory grew and more citizens lived farther from Rome. In 304 BC, a curule aedile named Gnaeus Flavius upset conservative opinion but performed a great public service by erecting an inscription of the calendar in the Roman Forum for permanent display. From early times, Roman private law and legal procedure had largely been controlled and developed by the priesthood of pontiffs. In 300 BC, the Ogulnian law, after the tribunes Gnaeus and Quintus Ogulnius, ended the patrician monopoly of two priestly colleges by increasing the number of pontiffs from 4 to 8 and the number of augurs from 4 to 9, and by specifying that the new priests were to be plebeian. In 287 BC, the third, and perhaps the only historical, secession of the plebs occurred. Since Livy's account has not survived, detailed knowledge about this event is lacking. One source suggests that debt caused the secession. Many sources state that the crisis was ended by the passage of the Hortensian Law, after Quintus Hortensius, dictator for 287, which was thought to have given enactments of the tribal assembly the same force as resolutions of the centuriate assembly. However, since similar measures were supposed to have been enacted in 449 and 339 BC, doubt persists about the meaning of these laws. It is possible that no difference ever existed in the degree of legal authority of the two assemblies. The three laws could be annalistic misinterpretations of a provision of the 12 tables specifying that what the people decided last should be binding. One source indicates that the Hortensian Law made all assembly days eligible for legal business. If debt played a role in the secession, the Hortensian Law may have been designed to reduce the backlog of lawsuits in the praetors' court in Rome. The Latin League, although the Latins dwelled in politically independent towns, their common language and culture produced cooperation in religion, law, and warfare. All Latins could participate in the cults of commonly worshipped divinities, such as the cult of the Penates of Lavinium, Juno of Lanuvium, and Diana, celebrated at both Aricia and Rome. Latins freely intermarried without legal complications. When visiting another Latin town, they could buy, sell, litigate, and even vote with equal freedom. If a Latin took up permanent residence in another Latin community, he became a full citizen of his new home. Although the Latin states occasionally waged war among themselves, in times of common danger they banded together for mutual defense. Each state contributed military forces according to its strength. The command of all forces was entrusted by common assent to a single person from one of the Latin towns. Sometimes the Latins even founded colonies upon hostile territory as military outposts, which became new, independent Latin states, enjoying the same rights as all the other ones. Modern scholars use the term Latin League to describe this collection of rights and duties. According to ancient tradition, Rome's last three kings not only transformed Rome into a real city but also made it the leader of the Latin League. There is probably exaggeration in this claim. Roman historians were eager to portray early Rome as destined for future greatness and as more powerful than it actually was. Rome certainly became one of the more important states in Latium during the 6th century, but Tibur, Praeneste, and Tusculum were equally important and long remained so. By the terms of the first treaty between Rome and Carthage, 509 BC, recorded by the Greek historian Polybius, c. 150 BC, the Romans, or, perhaps more accurately, the Latins generally, claimed a coastal strip 70 miles south of the Tiber River as their sphere of influence not to be encroached upon by the Carthaginians. Rome's rapid rise during the 6th century was the achievement of its Etruscan overlords, and the city quickly declined with the collapse of Etruscan power in Campania and Latium about 500 BC. Immediately after the fall of the Roman monarchy, amid Porsenna's conquest of Rome, his defeat by the Latins, and his subsequent withdrawal, the plain of Latium began to be threatened by surrounding hill tribes, Sabines, Equi, and Volsci, who experienced overpopulation and tried to acquire more land. Thus Rome's external affairs during the 5th century largely revolved around its military assistance to the Latin League to hold back these invaders. Many details in Livy's account of this fighting are, however, unreliable. In order to have a literary theme worthy of Rome's later greatness, Livy's annalistic sources had described these conflicts in the most grandiose terms. Yet the armies, military ranks, castrametation, i.e., techniques in making and fortifying encampments, and tactics described belong to the late Republic, not the Rome of the 5th century.